For this lesson, we are going to start with a conversation about our needs, and these needs will inform us in future lessons when we start talking about what happens during a disruption. But for now, let's first start by just explaining what these needs are. And we're going to start with our primary needs, really the three basic needs that all of us have, all of us were born with, and we carry throughout our lives. We have other needs, but these ones are kind of the predominant ones that will guide us as we make decisions and as we try to deal with the complexity and challenges that we face in our lives. So these primary needs are kind of grouped into three separate categories, and there's other things within those categories, but these are kind of the major overarching themes. And the first one is safety needs. These are fairly straightforward. Our safety needs are, we have a need for physical safety, to be safe from harm, safe from getting injured, safe from losing our lives. And we also have emotional needs for safety. We need to feel that we are safe in the spaces that we're in the relationships that we're in, that people aren't going to harm us emotionally. And then second is the belonging needs. And belonging is our need for care and love and protection from people that we are with, from our families, from our early in our childhood. It starts with our parents, our primary caregivers. We have attachment needs. In order to grow healthy, we need people, we need community, and we need support from those who care for us. And then the third one is our identity needs. And these are a little harder to pin down, but our identity needs are really related to our need to express ourselves, to be who we are, to live in this world in a way that gives us purpose and meaning and identity. It's about showing up as ourselves. Now, when we are well-resourced, when our needs are met, we can live quite freely, and we have this sense, if you look at this diagram, this is a person who has lots of space for exploring who they are because they feel safe and they have belonging in the world. They're being well-fed and well-resourced, and this is the ideal. And if you look back at your childhood, this may or may not describe your childhood. If you lived in a family that knew how to meet your safety and belonging needs and allowed you to be exactly who you were as you were growing up, this might reflect your family. But for many of us, this does not reflect our childhood because one of our needs was not being met at that time or fluctuates. Sometimes it fluctuates through that time. It's not always the same. But when our safety, belonging, and identity needs are all being met and we feel balanced, it gives us opportunity to live authentically. It gives us the capacity to learn how to balance our own needs with other people's needs. And we have the capacity for self-leadership. We tend to be resilient and courageous when our needs are being met. And that means that we can make good decisions. So we are emotionally quite well-balanced people when we have these needs met. Unfortunately, it's very often that there will be a threat to one of our needs. And if there is a threat, you'll see that circle gets bigger because that's where we then pour all of our energy and our emotions and in terms of trying to resolve that need and getting that need met. For example, if there's suddenly a threat to our safety, if we find ourselves in a conflict zone or someone is threatening us or to cause us harm, there's maybe an abusive situation, we're going to focus all our attention on getting that need met. We're going to prioritize safety over belonging and identity. And that might mean that we might reject some relationships because we're so focused on safety that it feels too risky to be in relationships with some people. We might be rejecting our identity. We're trying to live in a way that keeps us safe. So we might be actually shifting our identity in order to appease the person who's a threat to our safety. In abusive situations, you see this quite frequently, that a person will abandon who they are because they need to stay safe in that situation. When your belonging is under threat, then you will prioritize belonging over your safety and identity. And that might show up. You might become anxious or clingy because you're so focused on having your belonging needs met. Or on the flip side, you might show up as with a sense of bravado and performance because you're trying to prove your value and your worth to those who've threatened your belonging, your sense of belonging. And you can see this in children in the playground, for example, when they're so intent on making friends or finding belonging within certain in-groups, for example, they might make risky choices in order to get that belonging. And there might be a lack of trust in their own sense of opinions and beliefs because they're so focused on belonging to an in-group. This might be, for example, a gang situation or something like that, where there is a threat on you might get kicked out if you don't behave a certain way. So then I'm going to maybe give up who I am in order to stay safe, to fit there and have that belonging. A person who has belonging under threat might make some fairly dangerous choices. And then the third one, if your identity is under threat, well, then you're going to prioritize identity over safety and belonging. This might show up as somebody who's quite self-absorbed. It might even be some narcissistic behavior because they're so intent on claiming their identity and showing who they are. And they might make some selfish and risky decisions. And it's possible that the relationships they have will only work if those relationships revolve around this person's identity. And you can imagine, for example, a person whose identity is under threat is somebody who is having to live in a way that denies their sexual identity or their gender expression. And so they put a lot of energy and emotional labor into having that need met and showing up who they are. Sometimes there are simultaneous threats. Both your safety and belonging might be under threat at the same time, and so you're going to deprioritize your identity, and this might show up as performative, anxious, inconsistent, because you're maybe bouncing back and forth between the safety and belonging needs, and you might be torn between pleasing people and staying safe and forever kind of bouncing back and forth. And you can, again, when we look at children, we can see this kind of trying to find a way to meet both of those needs, but maybe making decisions that aren't quite balanced because they're so focused on these needs. And then there are times when all three things are under threat at the same time. And we'll talk about this a bit more in future lessons, but I want to talk about this as possibly a situation for many of us in this pandemic that we are undergoing, or maybe by the time you're watching this, maybe we will be emerging out the other end of the pandemic. But if we reflect on what happened for people as we went into a pandemic, suddenly there are threats coming from multiple sides. Our safety is under threat because there's a dangerous virus and we don't know how deadly this virus is, especially at the beginning. Our belonging might be under threat because we can't see our friends. We suddenly were being told to social distance. And so the places that gave us meaning, the connections we had, are under threat. We can't be with those people. Our identity might also be under threat because perhaps we can't do the job that gives us meaning. If somebody is, let's say, a public speaker, or somehow they need to be out in public, especially if somebody is extroverted and needs that public connection to fulfill their identity, that might be under threat as well during something like a pandemic. So this is going to be revealed as high anxiety. They might have a regularly flooded nervous system because that this person is really trying to make sure everything is about meeting those needs. And it's a really difficult place to make decisions from. And it might be a situation where trauma begins to run your life and dictate how you behave in the world. So what happens often, sadly, is that when people are focused on having all those three needs met, eventually what will usually happen is there'll be some crisis of identity. And this will look like the identity kind of gets separated from the safety and belonging needs because those become priority. Ultimately, we can live without the identity need longer than we can live without safety and belonging. If your life is being threatened, identity is going to take second priority. And so there's this we're faced with this impossibility, we make choices. And this might look like a severing of your sense of self. You don't know how to live like yourself. You're now no longer in alignment with your own values. And you might need something to wake you up in order to return to that sense of connection with you, who you are. Probably in this situation, there's going to be some healing and justice work needed in order to help you return to who you are. What will often happen when there's this separation from true identity, when safety and belonging are such critical needs, is that a person might adopt a false identity. And this is when you begin to live inauthentically, because you no longer know how to connect with yourself, because you've been so long in this kind of nervous system flooded situation of trying to have those primary needs met. This might be revealed as living in a way that makes safety and belonging at least temporarily accessible. So you're making choices based on the here and now and not necessarily long-term choices. And it's really a precarious position that's easily toppled, because we can't exist forever in a false identity, because we make up lies to cover other lies, and we try to prove who we are, not based on a real core sense of our truth, but based on what will help us be safe and find belonging. And this is where healing is really needed in order to reintegrate with your true identity. So the question we want to ask at the end of this lesson is, how do we get to this place of having all of our needs met and being well-resourced? It's a complicated question, and we're going to be touching on it more on other lessons. It's not something we can magically find our way to or return to, but we want to ask that question. We want to sit with the complexity of this, and I welcome you to continue in this journey. Thank you.